of my very good brothers, some of the most prominent Gambian intellectuals that I've had the pleasure of knowing and calling my brothers as well. Dr. Sulayman Njie, Gambian political scientist based of Texas, United States, and Amat Jeng, who is also a scholar and a researcher at Howard University, also Gambian as well. And both these individuals, as you know, have appeared on the show previously. Ahmad is also an author, and we've had him on the show to talk to us about his work and his, other scholarly work that he's involved in as well. And Saul has been here several times, as you may know already. And the interesting thing about both of them is that Saul lived in Washington D.C. for a very long time, and now that's where Ahmad is based off right now. So, and this is their first time each of them meeting each other. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Brahma. Thank you for having me. And of course, it's a great pleasure to be here with Dr. Njie, whom I have the pleasure to read, somewhere.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me. And I think I've connected with Ahmed. I think I have him on my LinkedIn. And then when Sonko told me about you, I was like, I don't think I know him. And he showed me a picture. I was like, yeah, I've seen him before. And I've
Yes.
seen some of your writings as well. So it's really
Thank you.
good to be here.
Thank you.
Well, one thing that I think that really strikes me, at least to begin with, is the fact that both of you, for a very long time, have been living in the diaspora, right? And you've both been fortunate enough to undergo serious academic journeys in the diaspora as well. And a large part of, I think, if Saul Fair is, I think it would be right to say that you spend most of your life now in the United States as more than you did in the Gambia. And perhaps that may be the case with Amada as well. But how has that experience been for both of you in terms of your professional journey, but also your academic journey as well?
I let the senior man go. So,
Is it maybe a senior man? um, so I think it's interesting because when I left Gambia, I was no more than a boy, right? So I had my understanding of the world was grounded in the Gambian sphere, right? What Gambia was about, but it was limited too, right? Because I didn't have the same expansive or exposure to the world that most people would, who've been able to travel or whatnot. So I was confined to mostly books and encyclopedia that really just expanded the imagination for me. So there had all these places and all these ideas that I was able to connect that traveling allowed me to do that to these United States. And I think for me though, what the United States was able to instill in me was discipline and structure that I didn't have growing up, right? I was all over the place, right? Like I was interested in a whole lot of things. So being in the academy in America and then coming here, yeah, about 20 years or so ago now, and then just being alone, trying to figure things out alone, is different. It teaches you a lot about life and the living of it, right? So I would say America shaped turned me into an intellectual, I would say. The Gambia was the foundation, right? Because my theoretical underpinnings or my framework is still very Gambian, right? Because nobody is totally divorced from their upbringing. No one is. No one is. It doesn't matter what you are, right? Because your upbringing shapes your prejudices, your biases, your love, your affection, how you see the world. America can refine that. The academy can refine that to a point. But what the academy would do, and when I say the academy, I'm talking about academia, right? The university setting and that kind of circle. What that does is it gives you an imagination that goes beyond what you know, right? It forces you to think outside the box. It teaches you rigor and structure and systems that you can use to apply. So that's why when people say, well, that person has a PhD in X, Y, and Z, but they were studying something about mice or they were studying something about, I don't know, cell phones. I was like, yeah, but that's not mundane. It's the rigor, how
Mhm.
you could use that and apply it to
Critical
things
thinking.
beyond
Mhm.
your what you know. So yeah, I would say America should really, I mean, without a doubt, really shape my worldview in a way. But I wouldn't say the United States of America as in the country, but the circles I was in and the circles I'm still in, but my foundation is still, without a doubt, very Gambian,
Gambian.
very, very Gambian.
uh, Ahmad, and I know yours also intersects between Europe and also now the United States, and also to a very much extent the Gambia, because that's what unites all of us. How has the
Yes.
experience been like for you?
I mean, I think it's quite similar to Seoul here. When you grow up in the Gambia, you have a very somehow narrow view of the world. And again, to quote Ibn Battuta, traveling turns you to a storyteller. And of course, when you are in the Gambia and you are reading books about the world outside, you do have some kind of understanding of how it is. But if you are not there and you live it, especially going through academia, societal challenges, you wouldn't know how it feels. So when I moved to Scandinavia, having had the opportunity to go to university in Scandinavia, Uppsala University, you somehow I would say you are indoctrinated in a Eurocentric way,
Mhm.
because Scandinavia is very wide in a sense. And I took a lot of opportunities to study abroad. I did that in the UK and of course in France. And the reason I took all these opportunities is to try to figure out actually um, where in the academia I belong. How do I see myself being represented, and what are the challenges? So like I said, I never wanted to move to the United States. Never in my mind. When we came to Seattle, 2023, when I saw you actually dancing, when you came in as the wingman for your friend during the wedding. So after that, when we went back home, but before that, I had tried to, I applied already at Howard University. But then I wanted to go to a place that actually would that I would feel represented in a sense that
Mhm.
I wanted to move away from the Eurocentric perspective of international relations, the Eurocentric perspective of political science, to more of an African study grounded space where I can connect spiritually, intellectually, of course, methodologically, which is very important as an Africanist, with the African diaspora, but more importantly, with the African, American African, I would call it, people like
Mhm.
Dr. Sol Njie, who have been here and are grounded in methodological rigor and all of that. So I think another important thing is when you're outside the Gambia. I would say when you're outside your country, it doesn't matter whether Gambia or Uganda, and you see in the Gambia or you see in your country from the outside in, then you have a broader perspective when it comes to how things are going, what sort of challenges you feel like are there. Because a lot of the time people in the Gambia think we are disconnected, which is not the case. I think a lot of us are more actually connected to the realities of the country than a lot of Gambians,
Mhm.
I would say, because we have the digital space where we are connected. Or we also have the social network where we connected about when it comes to things that are going on in the country. So I feel like um, moving to the United States gives me an opportunity not only to grow, but also to grow within an African epistemological framework where I can look at Africa from an Africanist perspective, not from a Eurocentric or Euro-Atlantic perspective.
So, considering, as you mentioned, some of the things that are happening back home, one thing that also unites at least all the three of us is the fact that we're very connected with what goes on, and we care deeply about what goes around, both at home and also outside of home. And it is in
Mhm.
that respect that I would like to also begin this conversation with looking at some of the recent happenings in the Gambia, particularly as regards to the Apex Trivergence Accord that political parties or political organizations or institutions or movements recently signed as it pertains to how they engage among each other as they set the stage for what would be, or what is perhaps not going to be, a coalition as they get into 2026 elections. Now, the parties that were involved in this, at least some of them were United Democratic Party. You also had Gambia for All, led by Bakari Bunja Dabo. You also had Sobeya, led by Esa Fal, and I think other two individuals who were also involved. So altogether, it's like six political actors that came together to sign a divergence. Obviously, Talib Ahmed Bensouda and UMC are also involved in this as well, and so I cannot help but recognize that UMC came from UDP, and they are in fact part of this as well. So a possibility could emerge where one of them could in fact become, eventually, I think a lot of people anticipate a situation like that, where a coalition could happen where, even though they are political adversaries or opponents at this point, they could still come together to form a partnership. But what is your observation, Suleiman, of how significant this divergence is? Some people have, tried to downplay its meaning, just to say that it's not important at all, and some have said that it's good to set the ground for how opposition parties interact.
No, I think it's good for the opposition, right? A united opposition is better than a fractured one. And I think going into the next elections, there has to be a united front if they want to win. I mean, that's just the only way. A fractured position really is not viable at all. And I think you and I had this conversation the last time, yeah, I was here, about UDP going and at it alone would not help. So I think this is a really positive news for the opposition, that they're willing to have conversation. And I've said this before. Our politics is not ideological. These are not ideological differences, right? These are personality based differences. So if the opposition can come together around that, around tinkering around the idea of the personalities, there is nothing that UDP disagrees with Sobeya, or Bakari Bunjadaba's party, or even UMC. I don't see any ideological differences. The difference is that, who do you think would be the best candidate to lead that front? I think that is where the problem is going to come. But that's also the most important part of this. Who within that group, who in that group of this coalition in the opposition could lead a united front to go against Barrow? Because you have to remember, Barrow already has a coalition. This is not an NPP alone government, right? NRP is still there. The APRC, big faction of the APRC under Fabakar Tamangjare is still there. And then you have the smaller splintering parties of one, like, my father's party and all the, but it's a numbers game. Politics is a numbers game. The more people you have, the better. So I think for the opposition, this is a step in the right direction, that they're starting to have conversations about this, right? About the idea that they should come together. I mean, it's just reality. Reality is going to hit you in your face sometime, right? So you got to face reality head on. And I think they just need to start having more conversations. And, even with, you and I had this conversation before, even about the constitution of the Gambia and all that stuff. I'm like, if we don't need Goodluck Jonathan to come to Gambia to fix that, Barrow and Daba can sit down and we can get a new constitution tomorrow if you want, right? And that's just how small Gambia is, right? Gambia is not as splintered as we try to make it out to be, especially, online. We are all connected somehow. So I think if the opposition can come together around a person, because that's what this is all about. At the end of the day, it's about one person. Who would that person be? And are they going to have like some kind of a convention and all that stuff to pick up a leader as a coalition, rather than one party leading the coalition and then everybody joining, like what you have in the NPP? I think it'll be much better if they do what they did in 2016. I think for me, I think that's a better approach. And it takes the stigma and all that stuff around who is running this.
Mhm.
I think it's the better for them, but they have to make that decision for themselves.
Ahmad, do you envision a situation where, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I just
Yes.
wanted to take a different route in terms
Okay.
of like what we see in the divergence in the Gambia. I don't see any difference from what is going on right now in terms of like bringing these parties together to what we had in 2021 in the Janjambure Accord. The 2021 Janjambure Accord, which was actually, I would say, it led to 18 political parties signing an accord, but an accord is not a coalition.
Mhm.
And we have to understand this divergence is not a coalition. It is just political parties coming together to say, let's exercise civility.
Mhm.
Going forward, let's try to not go after one another.
Hostile.
Let's yeah, it's not a political party. I wouldn't. It's not a coalition building. It probably might lead to that, but
Yeah.
I don't see how that is going to lead to that, because if you leave UDP and you form your own political party, you call it UMC, and you say you're ideologically different, and now you are going into a coalition with the UDP, that circles back to what Dr. Njie says. The Gambian political system is not based on ideology. It is based on electoral necessity. So
Mhm.
I think the challenge we have then is, how do we move from having a this accord that they signed,
Mhm.
to forming coalition, bringing together different parties who have different, I wouldn't even call it ideological views, but different policies in terms of how they wanna govern. So I
Mhm.
think the challenge is not to say, oh, let's exercise civility. The challenge for the opposition party is, how do they come together and form a formidable force based on conviction, based on the idea that they want to work together. This is the challenge they have. But I don't see this as a coalition formation. It is not. And I don't think it is going to lead to a coalition formation, including all the parties that are signatory to the current accord that we see. I don't think so. They
Yeah.
might end up splitting, and they might end up having few other parties signing.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I
okay, so go ahead.
now I was gonna say it's definitely not a coalition, but it's a step in the right direction, right?
Yes.
They're having conversations, right? They're not speaking at each other, they're speaking to each other. And I think that is very important, right?
Yeah.
Because our politics really, it manifests itself in these diatribes and just insults and, people attacking each other. So I think it's like they cannibalize each other in the opposition, right? So instead of going after the elephant in the room, they're literally just attacking each other just mercilessly, right? And at some point you realize, like, what is the end goal here? What are they trying to achieve, right? So I think at least civility is important to start it there. I think Sobia is an interesting entity here. BB Davos Party is an interesting entity here. But in the opposition right now is UDP, Mama Kande, and UMC.
Yeah.
Literally, those are the main entities. If you can have those three main entities in a room to start having conversations about civility, and if you can bring them into as part of this accord or an MOU, whatever you want to call it, I think that's a step in the right direction. At least they're having conversations, and I think they're also realizing the importance of actually not attacking each other right now, because that doesn't help any of them. It really doesn't at all.
And to that point, Saul, too, I think I'm more inclined towards it because I do think there is at least what looks to me to be a good faith commitment to engage, right? Whether that leads to a coalition eventually, I think we'll have to wait to see. But at least we can also understand and observe the dynamics of these parties. Some of them left UDP and they've said things about each other. And in fact, I think even as this accord is being signed until now, some members of those particular parties are still saying derogatory stuff about the other side. And so we beg the question of, if you treated me this way, would it lead to us eventually sitting down? And in fact, if UDP that has made its position unambiguously clear that we're not getting into any partnership unless we are the leader of that partnership because we are the biggest opposition party in the Gambia, does that set a ground to say that if we are not selected, we are not going to go ahead? And they've made that clear. Even as of yesterday, I had one of their members here. He made that abundantly clear. So, what is the point when we are getting into a conversation or an agreement already when we know that you are not going to agree if majority of a democratic process goes on and we decide to go another route, then you are going to eventually leave. But that's a conversation that we can continue to have. I don't think we'll come to a conclusion about it. But the second issue I do really want to, seek you guys' opinions on is there's been also a recent trend when it comes to the local government councils in the Gambia. In terms of if they're initiating projects, the government mostly reaches out to them to ask them to stop, or if they need an authorization to carry on in line with the legal framework that guides the operation of local governments in the Gambia, the government will always deny them. And we could also take a reference from KMC when they had an issue with Senator Martin when the government sent security officials to install, I mean, an individual who I think by a legal decision was not meant to be there, among other things. But this has been happening. So recently, Brikama Area Council have been involved in a project called the Beautification Project, and the physical planning of the Gambia reached out to them to ask them to stop. And they've not asked them to stop when they started, and they've asked them to stop when they're in the middle of implementing the project. But I do want to ask, what do you think about this trend of, while we have a very decentralized system of governance, there is still this imposition from the top to our local governments who, by their own legal right, are doing the work that is required of them, want them to stop because it seems like it's not politically convenient, or it doesn't make the government look good if local government, who are mostly opposition parties, opposition councils, for example, are able to do these things. So you can go first.
Yeah, yeah. So I think most of this started during the Jama era, right? Where literally they bastardized the local government act and literally just we did not have that decentralization. I mean, the we had a centralization of power, right? Where the local governments did not have the powers that they were supposed to have, right? Because the federal government functions at one level and the local governments function at another level, right? And I think when you look at even the basic, and I will get to the back issue, but I think what you've seen in these years is that the things that the local governments were supposed to do, basically by law, they can't even do some of them because of the way the taxes work and all that stuff, right? And because of how everything was taken over by the national government. The Birkama Area Council issue, I think, is interesting because what I still want to know, because I did see Young's Dabo's statement, but what I still wanted to know is what was the level of cooperation between the national government and the local government? Did the local government seek and get permission from the national government to be able to do those things? What is the protocol? Is this something that the local governments usually do? If does
The
the area
law, the
council
law,
want to do this?
the law
Do
allows
they?
them to do it. Yes, and the law
No, no,
allows. Yes.
no. What I mean, not what they're doing, but is this is something they usually do? Like, for example, if they want to build something on the side of a road or whatever, do they usually consult with? It's all about norms, right?
Yeah.
What was the norm, right? Was the norm that the local governments have the authority, so they just within the confines of the authority do stuff, or are they expected to consult with the national government in that case? And this is not just Birkamere Council; I'm talking about the whole country. So if we can see some patterns where this is happening in Bassa, where basically the NPP government is running. And then in Birkama Area Council, they're doing something different. That becomes a problem, right? But I think this is something that impedes our progress as a country. If Birkama Area Council has good ideas, I just don't understand why it really doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because our politics sometimes is very stupid, right? Because you see certain things, you're like, why? Why are we doing this, right? It doesn't make any sense. And then it becomes purely nakedly politics rather than just collaboration. And that's what I'm saying. Most of our problems, a good chunk of our problems, is people refusing to have conversations. It's not the problem of ideology or anything else. It's just people sitting down, politicians, harsing things out and fixing our problems. And these are serious problems that affect people in our communities, right? So what you are saying is pure politics, it's pure power grab. That's that's how I see it. But again, what are the norms? And I don't know what the norms are when it comes to this, because again, there are laws and then there are norms, right? Because when it comes to governance, it's very important to understand whether we have a one size fits all kind of policy, or
Mhm.
are these things something that the national government and the state government and the local governments work together on to fix things. And I still think this is something the national government can work together with Brigadier Council to fix. I don't see why they cannot.
Ahmad, we've
Yes.
seen, for example, here in the United States, Mamdani, who is a socialist democrat, the mayor of excuse me, of New York City. He's been to the White House at least twice now, and this is an individual that publicly and ideologically is at a complete different wavelength with the president of the country. But when it comes to getting the things that he wants, he sits down with the president of the United States. So, what is the significance of instead of being reactionary to also be, I mean, to take the initiative sometimes, or to be
Mhm.
diplomatic in a sense, to say not everything deserves confrontation, not everything deserves coming out, to
Mhm.
put it in public sphere, to litigate it before the public. How about we engage more? So my question really is, do you think it's important for Brikama Area Council, including Yankuba Dabo, for them to also engage the government in a much more diplomatic sense than
Mhm.
always coming out to do what looks like confrontational? Because I think that's a lot of a flag that he
Yeah.
gets because of how he
Yeah.
conducts himself.
Mhm, mhm. I think what we have to understand is that Gambian politics is not decentralized. We have decentralized policies, maybe, but it is not decentralized the way we think it is. So when you are a local council, a chair or mayor, I think it is important for you to understand that the governance structure we have right now is based on Jammeh's governance structure. And during Jammeh time, we all know that neither Birkama nor Serekunda nor Basse, none of these councils were independent of the central government.
Mhm.
So if you come and the laws haven't changed and you want to operationalize your system outside those parameters, you're probably going to face challenges. What I think we have to do, even in the United States, we know the mayor of New York has certain powers, but he knows the limits of his powers.
Yeah.
Just like the president of the United States knows the limit of his power when it comes to state issues. So I think it is important that the chair and of course Talib Bensouda, it is time they sit together with the government and have a dialogue in terms of how transformational they want to be. But I
Mhm.
think we have the courts. I more or less feel like the courts are our last. I would say, it's. I believe in the courts in the Gambia. So let them put it to the courts and see. But I think it's important to have a dialogue. You cannot
Yeah.
go all Rambo and you feel like you can run your council anyhow you want when that council is actually operating on the frameworks that are built by a dictatorial system that haven't changed. It's important to take that into account.
Finally, on the issue of our country, the Gambia, recently the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency went to Jinak. I think Jinak became a central concentration for all of us because it became a hub for irregular migration for a lot of young people. In fact, I think recently most young people lost their life that began their journey from Jinak itself. And so it also became a central place for focus for government in terms of the marijuana business because Jinak for a very long time has been almost a safe space where government officials don't attempt to go or try to go. They've lived in this environment where they've always had their marijuana, commercial business that they do. And for some reason, I mean, we had various perspectives that people have. Government do not interfere with what they're doing over there. But since the irregular migration story came up, they've become a center of attention. And so recently, the Drug Enforcement Agency went there and they bond and really took away a lot of the marijuana farms that they had. So and I really watched this harrowing story from the women who own some of those farms when according to them this is the only means of sustenance and livelihood that they have is taken away from them without an alternative from the government. So they did not offer them anything in return to say, well, this is illegal, we're going to take this away from you. There is no other option. I think Watson Gambia distributed about 100,000 to different women who are there to sort of help them with what they're doing. And the women are crying, they're weeping on the state of affairs that they're experiencing. But Saul, I do really want to ask you, is it about time for us as a country, as poor as we are, to really begin serious conversations about the marijuana issue? Either not, I mean, there has to be a framework to regulate it. Obviously, nobody can just get up and say, "Oh, I'm just going to have marijuana," or I'm just no. There has because marijuana has some, medicinal benefits. We all know that, But in terms of the benefits that it could give for our small economy, is it time for us to have a conversation about that?
I definitely think so. What is the purpose of a law? Why do we have laws, right? So we have all these laws that we really haven't revisited for a while. And I don't even think the CRC was able to revisit some of these draconian laws that we have on the books, right? For people of Jinak, several governments came and left. And in all of those times, they had kind of an understanding with the state that you don't interfere in our local affairs, right? Does that mean they were operating outside the law? Absolutely, they were. But there was an understanding that this is our reality, and our reality is that our soil is not that great for anything else other than this, and then you leave us alone, right? So the government was not encroaching or enforcing the laws there, right, in the way it's supposed to, right? But I think we need to start asking ourselves that question: why do we have such draconian laws when it comes to things like
Drink.
marijuana,
Hmm.
but we don't have the same for alcohol, which is actually much worse, right? And we had a time when the state was actually involved in the production and distribution of alcohol in the country, right?
Hmm.
So, what benefit is it for us to have a country where we are just so draconian when it comes to this? And I think many of the victims of drug enforcement in the country, a bunch of kids in these neighborhoods just, I mean, I've seen this firsthand with drug enforcement in Serekunda, especially like when Jesus was there, right? I mean, it was just pure evil what they were doing to the boys. Like it just didn't make any sense. I was a victim of it. I was bitten to like pieces
Oh.
and taken to the Tallinding police station for just hanging around, for just existing as a boy because there was assumption that somehow the guys that were after, I was one of those people, right? So we need to revisit our laws because it doesn't make any sense that I can walk in the streets of Washington, D.C. and smoke a joint next to the White House. And then in the Gambia, we're taking women in Jinak, poor women, and just taking their livelihoods from them. It doesn't make sense. And in addition, I think we do a lot of things that don't make sense to me, policy wise. And I think this is one of the problems I had with Nyancho when he was going down the street, going after the street hawkers or whatever, right? I'm not saying those street hawkers were not breaking the law. That's not the thing. That's not the conversation. We have an economy that is based on people who were existing outside the parameters of the law. You need to find them alternatives before you take their livelihoods from them. You cannot just come and say, hey, this is the law, we're going to enforce it, then you find your own way. That's not how this works. It just doesn't work that way. As a country, I think, especially as a government, there should be more empathy for people. And I don't think our government has empathy for the people who live in that country. They actually do not. What Nyancho was
Seems we've lost Suleiman for a second. Sol, are you with us? We'll try to get him back. But Ahmad is here, so
Yeah, I think it feels like he disappears. But I think what I also wanted to add to that is that I think that
okay.
he says there was a kind of, okay, can you hear me, Brian?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just trying to admit Sol back in, but it seems we can't see him anymore. So I'm
Okay.
gonna take you back. Just try to come back on, and I'll admit you. But yes, Ahmad, go ahead, please.
Yeah. He says the Jame government probably had um, form of an agreement in a sense to let this women do their wheat farming and what have we. I think that's a failure in terms of governance. We cannot have an entity like that functioning in some parts of the country when actually you illegalize wheat. So I tend to believe that we still operate on a kind of a colonial architecture.
Mhm.
We allowed alcohol in the country. Alcohol is legal in the Gambia, and wheat is not legal. That
Yeah.
itself, for me, is striking in a sense. The other thing I found really interesting, also shocking in a sense, is that a lot of young people are thrown in jail just for small packs of weed, when we have major drug dealers running free in the country. I think these are contradictions, these are dialectical um, forces that
Contradictions.
we have that we need to confront. I believe. Otherwise, we're gonna be talking about this over and over again. When you decide to take away the livelihood of certain people, as Dr. Njie said, you have to give them the mechanisms to be able to sustain their life, because you are not able to provide that. We don't have social safety nets where as you can actually go into the communities and give them paychecks and what have we don't have that. We have a system and economy that is based on microeconomics, hawkers in the street. These are monies that are getting food on the table. These are monies that are paying school fees. When you take that away from those people, you have to give them something. You cannot just be a reactive system where you just wake up one day and you start implementing laws without putting the mechanisms in place to help sustain the livelihoods of those individuals. You bring in hardship, and what that leads to is disillusionment with the system.
So we lost you for a second. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that's why
I
I don't
was
use
just
my phone.
piggybacking on what you said.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I did hear some part of it. No, I was just having some phone calls coming in, and because I'm using my phone, so that kind of like knocked me off my perch. But no, like I heard what you said, and I think you're absolutely right on the money. Right? We cannot destroy the economic systems we have, and then we're not replacing them with anything just because that's what the law says, right? And these are draconian laws that we need to seriously revisit. Things like marijuana and all that stuff, we really seriously need to revisit. And that doesn't mean we don't have a drug problem in the country, because I know this. Growing up, we actually have an alcoholism problem in the country and a drug problem, big drug issues, right? And growing up, marijuana was the big drug. Now, like, we have a lot of junkies in the country, and it's just a matter of time before a reckoning is going to happen. So I'm not saying that we should
Marijuana is the
liberalize.
least of our problems right now.
It absolutely is. And I totally agree. And we have serious drug
Yeah.
issues in this country. I just don't think marijuana, some people say it's a gateway drug, granted. I don't think marijuana is the big issue. And the amount of resources we're putting into policing how people are using marijuana and destroying the lives and the livelihoods of
In,
people in Guinea
in the
without
amount
any
of young
alternatives.
people in jail, actually, Dr. Njai, the amount of young people in jail, languishing in jail right now, just because they were caught with one or two packets of marijuana, that is absolutely insane. So I think if we have an organization of lawyers that voluntarily reviewing cases, they have to look at these
Yeah.
issues. How can you be caught with one joint of marijuana and you are spending 6 months in jail when somebody opens fire in a nightclub and then you charge them for what bodily harm injuries and what have we? So I think
Yeah.
those are challenges, issues that we have as a country.
I agree.
Totally. Well, we're going to move on to the main subject that we wanted to address today, which is a focus on, the crisis in the Middle East. And so, since the end of the Second World War, the global system was designed around the UN Charter, international human rights law, and international humanitarian law. Yet today, we see a near complete disregard for these norms by some of the most powerful states. From your perspective, Dr. Njai, what historical turning points explain this erosion? How did we arrive at a world where states are sovereign in theory but profoundly unequal in practice?
That's a good question. And I think we can go on this topic for like an hour, but I don't think we have that time, right?
Yeah,
I think states have always been unequal, right? I don't think there is any conversation that even the formation of the United Nations was about equal states. I think one of the things behind it was to find a way to have conversations before they launch into wars, right? And I think, and that's also what started the first. I mean, the League of Nations. I think that's where we need to start, because the League of Nations was founded. Technically, the concept came from Woodrow Wilson of the United States, right? After Versailles and stuff, about having a body politic or a body an entity where people can go and have conversations before they get into wars. And because the first world was so senseless, it was so ridiculous, it did not make any sense, it didn't have to happen, right? So unfortunately, the United States Senate never signed a treaty. So the States never joined the League of Nations, even though it was the idea of the United States. What collapsed brought about the end of the League of Nations was very simple. It's not any different from what we're seeing today. You have imperial Italy, fascist Italy under Mussolini, going into Ethiopia and taking over Ethiopia. But even before that, you had the Japanese the Empire of Japan going into Chinese Manchuria, which they turned into Manchukuo and turned it into a puppet state. And they said they had the right. So they were telling the Europeans, wait a minute, you have all these colonies. You're telling me I cannot have one? You're crazy. And they went into it, right? But you didn't have one hegemon. United States came as was the biggest power out of the war because it was not technically, apart from Pearl Harbor, United States was not attacked, right? So all of these countries were destroyed for the most part. United States came in as the most powerful entity at that time, but United States never joined the League of Nations. What is different today is we have a global hegemon as in the United States. Even though United States does not practice what it preaches, it is still there to police it. And I think that is the difference here.
Yeah.
So that's why you can see the powerful countries are still going to do whatever they want. So we can take an example here. In 2014 or 2009, I believe, Russia went into Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia and annexed that part of that country. In 2014, they went to the Crimea and annexed that part of the country. What happened? Nothing, because might is right. That's literally how it is. The United States got into Vietnam and they were little United Nations at the time. So what we are seeing today now, though, the big issue that we're gonna keep on we'll have to deal with is who is gonna stop who? Who is gonna benefit from this system, right? Because the United States is saying now that wait a minute, we were preaching this stuff. We're not doing it anymore. We're just gonna go about and do whatever we want. We're not preaching. We're not pretending. We're not telling you this is what we believe. But even though we're acting different, they're like, no, we don't care about any of those norms anymore, right? And I think it was telling when not Harper. Oh man, I'm dated. When the Prime Minister of Carney, the Prime Minister of
Connie,
Canada,
Canada.
went to Davos and basically said that the global order was dead, and he was right. We don't have the same global order we had a year ago. But all the other small entities, the smaller countries, still rely on that global order. They need it. They absolutely need it. So the United Nations is not just a place. These laws are not just there for certain, to just bring us together. But they're there to be, they can be still applied to certain countries,
Mhm.
and certain countries will still have to adhere to those laws, even though certain countries don't, right? So it's interesting because let's take the African countries, for example. We don't really add much to the UN system. We're beneficiaries of this system. We benefit the most out of any of these countries. So we will want the UN to stay. And we have numbers, right? But somebody has to pay for it. And who's paying for it? The powerful countries. Well, you cannot then have an equal system. When one country is subsidizing the budget of the Gambia, you expect that country to have the same powers as, as the Gambia. It's just not realistic, right? So these are aspirational. So the UN Charter, all these things are more aspirational than realistic, right? Because states operate based on their own interests. And when it comes to that, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. That doesn't mean it's moral, because that's not how states operate.
Mhm.
State act based on their own own national interests. For the longest time, United States and the European countries were telling us that somehow these things are real. United States is now saying, no, we don't believe in any of this. So that you don't even have to. That's your problem. If you don't, we're just going to come and do whatever we want. And so it's a whole, we're in uncharted waters right now.
I'm sure you may want to add one or two things to what Saul have already said, but I'm going to ask you also because you do some work on China-African relations and some of your journals that you publish focus on China as well. But China undeniably has become a global force and attracting political and economic interests across the world, including recent diplomatic engagements from Canada and UK. At Davos, the Canadian Prime Minister, as Saul said, even declared that the world order is dead. And so I'm curious to ask you, are we truly entering a multipolar world order led by China, or is it still more about the United States?
I think we are not entering a war a multipolar world. I would say we've already entered the multipolar world,
Okay.
and it's not a multipolar world where we replace one hegemon with the other. We're not replacing the United States with China. What we have is constellation of different entities. For example, the BRICS. We have the convergence of different other organizations. The European Union. The European Union has learned a lesson for the past 2 years in terms of how they converge, in terms of how they come together to counter the rising influence of different countries, especially the United States. We have to understand that for many years, for decades, the United States has been the protege of Europe. And Donald Trump has shown to the European Union that this is no longer the case. If you look at in 1963, there was a crisis at the European Union when Charles de Gaulle, they call it the empty chair crisis. Maybe I'm wrong about the year, but it's around the 60s. The empty chair crisis. The empty chair crisis was when President Charles de Gaulle boycotted the European Commission meeting. One, because he felt like Britain was bringing America so close to the orbit of the European Union. And this was something he envisioned for quite a long time, that we have to be independent. We have to stand on our own. We have to have our own strong budget system, defense system. We don't have to rely on the United States to defend ourselves. And this was his vision, and this was the bone of contention during that time, that he had to boycott the meeting during that time. So now today we live in a multipolar world. If you know, before Donald Trump came to power for many years, after the end of the Cold War, we made to believe that the world is moving more toward international organization. The importance of the nation state was dissipating. So nations are converging at the United Nations. That's where power politics plays out. But then we can see that the nation state actually is still here. We've seen that in the recent events involving the United States, involving Iran and Israel, and of course Russia and Ukraine. So what we are witnessing today is not us moving towards a multipolar world, is the result of a multipolar world that is lacking structure, that is very unpredictable, as has always been the case in terms of the anarchical system that we have. But I think having China added on the mix, it's interesting in many ways, because we have to understand where the Chinese are coming from. The Chinese, just like the many African countries or countries in the global south, were also at some point colonized. They have what they call the 500 years of humiliation that China had to undergo during the Ming Dynasty and all of that. So China coming out of that, I think it's somehow similar to what Iran is going through right now, the humiliation that it faces in the international system. We have seen a lot of countries that have gone through challenges like this. But I think it's important to see it as we have actually started living in a multi where power is unstructured, where power is unpredictable, where we cannot I don't think we have a single hegemon in a sense. If we do
Yeah.
have it, we are having a kind of a declining system.
And if you may wrap up that bit of it with Ahmad, how do you understand China's growing relationship with the global South?
It is very interesting, I think, when you look at it, because China's relationship with the global south is built on certain pillars. One is that China has this non-interference policy that a lot of dictators in the global south really admire. China is not coming there to preach you about democracy, but they don't also want you to interfere in their domestic politics. That is interesting. And China, we do believe that China is not interfering in the domestic politics of African countries, but that is just a matter of time. The more China invests in Africa, the more China has like assets in Africa, the more we probably see China involving in Africa one way or the other. I'm going to give you an example. This happens in Zimbabwe. Before Mugabe was deposed, the current president of Zimbabwe, he was the general then, he traveled to China. The day he came back, the next day he deposed Mugabe. So it is interesting to see the dynamics of what is going on in terms of China-Africa relationship. The question of sovereignty, that China is a non-interfering system, so on and so forth. What is interesting for African countries is not to replace one hegemon with the other. And then when we want to understand the dynamics shaping China's Africa relationship, we also have to look at the dynamics that had been shaping Africa's relations with the West. One thing I found interesting in terms of dealing with the Chinese for African countries is that they respect you. They treat you with dignity and respect. I heard the former president, the former minister of agriculture of Liberia was once speaking. He said when they went to China, the respect they were given from the airport, the place they were taken to, the dignitaries that they met, all of that was so much fascinating. And they came to the United States even to meet the third important, I don't know, the Speaker of the House of Representatives was a problem, was a challenge. So I think the respect that China accords, and I think this is grounded in the Confucius system. It's grounded in the philosophy that the Chinese has. When Mao Zedong sent contractors to Africa in the 60s and 70s, he told them, go there and I want you to just go there, humble yourself, and live among them, and don't go there and feel like you're better than them. Those are principles that the Chinese system has espoused since before Deng Xiaoping came to power in the 70s. So I think it's interesting to frame it that way, to look at China, framing Africa's relations, to say, hey, look, we were humiliated just as you were. We are victims of imperialism, just as you are today. So it is important that we work together and we respect your sovereignty. Whether that is good or bad in terms of human rights, it's another question.
So, Africa has long demanded a permanent seat on UN Security Council as the global power shifts and new alliances being formed. Where does Africa stand today? Is the continent gaining leverage, or is it still structurally marginalized within international system? And to also add that, I think at this juncture to recognize that the former president of Senegal, President Macky Sall, is vying for the Secretary General of the United Nations. That's somewhere that is very close to home. And regardless of what you think of Macky Sall's time as president of the Senegalese people, one should, I think, consider and welcome this as a great development for the continent, because I do think that we've only had so far two African presidents, Kofi Annan, and also the other one from Egypt, I think,
Boutros
Boutros,
Ghali.
yes, Boutros
Boutros Ghali,
Ghali.
yeah.
And so if this
Even
comes
Brutus
through,
Ghali,
yes, Macky Sall would only be the third president, and also significantly, I may add, the only Muslim Secretary General. I don't know how much significant that will be to the rest of the world, but I think for us and the part of the world that we're from, it's at least part of our identity. So, if you would address the question that I've raised in terms of, structure, our position in the international system, but also how significant is the candidacy of Macky Sall?
I mean, it's symbolic, but beyond that, I don't really see the importance of it in the grand scheme of things. It's symbolic, and identity politics is important. Like, it gives people hope and aspirations and that kind of stuff. But beyond that, I just don't see what else he can do, right? As the Secretary General of the United Nations, right? I think Kofi Annan was just a wonderful leader of the United Nations. I mean, he really shaped that institution. He made a lot of reforms, and he was a really visionary and just a wonderful leader of the United Nations. um, for a prominent seat at the United Nations, why would the powerful countries allow that to happen? And I'm not being I'm not being sarcastic here, but why would they? You don't just request and get these things. You demand and you show why. Because Ahmad was talking about China. The current Chinese state was not part of the UN Security Council. It was a nationalist government of Chiang Kai-shek that was part of the Security Council up until 1971.
Mhm.
Why is it
Yeah.
that things switch to this China? Well, this China before the 70s was a backward country of just poor peasants who had nothing to offer to the world other than just breathing. Literally. What happened? They decided to ask for respect. And how do you do that?
You earn it.
You have to earn it. They pulled 500,000 people or more now out of poverty in the last 40 years. I mean, we're talking about just insane numbers we're talking about here.
No,
Just
it's 900 million
now.
people. That's more than the population of Europe.
Well, basically, almost the population of Africa.
Yeah.
Almost the population of Africa, right? How did
Yeah.
they do that? Why is it that India cannot demand the same thing and get it?
Mhm.
Because it's not about a numbers game, right? It's about respect. And how do you earn respect? You don't become an appendage.
Mhm.
If you look at the UN budget for security, humanitarian aid, all that stuff goes, most of it goes to Africa. Why? Why should the United Nations give those people a seat to veto stuff? Why? They're part of the Security Council, though. So I think currently Liberia and Somalia are part of the Security Council.
Yes, two. Just two.
The whatever, but
Yes.
they don't have the veto power, right?
Yes.
But why should they give them the veto power at all? Like, I think that's the question. Why should any African country get a veto power, right? Because power is something you have to earn. You just don't say that, give it to me because we exist. No, that's not how these things work. And when the United Nations was formed too, many African countries did not exist. There were only two African countries, only two independent African countries. That was Liberia and the Empire of Ethiopia. Those were the only two countries that
Yeah.
existed. Since then, we had 54 countries, but we don't have any of those countries that you can consider a serious country, with all due respect. And I think Malcolm X said this long time ago. Until and unless there is a stable, respectful Black African country, nobody's going to take Black people seriously over the wall. And it's the same thing, right? The United Nations is there to help African countries survive. Literally, we benefit so much from this, from the setup of the United Nations. So that's why the powerful countries understand this. Hannah Arendt, she wrote the book The Banality of Evil, and she based this based on her, most of her writing is based on her experience as a stateless person from Nazi Germany, ending up in France and then the United States. And she had a problem with pity, feeling sorry for yourself or people feeling sorry for you. Her thesis was that the person doing the pitying, the person who's feeling sorry for you, holds the power, right? Because they feel so sorry for you that they have the power to change your situation. And that's the problem. That's where we are in Africa. Until and unless we start taking the routes of China and Russia. And also, Russia was not part of the UN Security Council either. It was the Soviet Union. There were different republics within the Soviet Union. Why is it that Russia became the successor state to that seat? Because again, they had to earn it. How do you earn this? You improve the lives and livelihoods of your people. You become independent and stop being dependent on these countries. Until and unless we do that, there is no reason why any of these members on the Security Council will be reckless enough to give any of these African countries a permanent seat to the Security Council. It just is not in their own benefit. Would I want that to happen? Absolutely. That would be great, right? But why would they do that? That's the question. Why do they have to do that? Why? Why? Why should that happen?
Yeah.
That's
Ahmad, you wanna?
actually
Yeah.
we can even
Yes.
add that. Yeah, we can add that. Like Doctor said, he was talking about how China wasn't actually in the Security Council. It's important also to say that actually China coming back to the Security Council was thanks likely to African countries. Three-thirds of those who voted for China to come back to the Security Council over Taiwan were African countries. Even though the veto was moved, the vote was initiated by Albania, if I get it right. So I think what Doctor is saying is very pertinent when we look at it, and I think it is important as African countries right now, since we standing individually have challenges. We cannot withstand what is going on right now, but probably convergence. We see what is happening in the Sahel region in Mali. You see, United States just lifted the ban on Mali.
Mhm.
The United States just sent a team to Mali to say, we respect your sovereignty. We want to work with you. And they lifted the ban. Why? Probably because the Malian government stood on its feet, and that is what Doctor was just saying. You have to earn certain things in the international system. We live in an anarchical system. We have to earn certain things. And I think this is the route that Iran was heading to. And I think this is the route that whichever government takes over after whatever results we have with the Iran war is also going to take, because they know, the current government of Iran was, in a sense, instituted by the United States. somehow, I mean, after the revolution, that government that was there, um, was so much so, a U.S. puppet. So the current, Shah revolution that came, I mean, the Ayatollah that came after became antagonistic. So right now, I was listening. I think we're gonna get into this later in terms of what is going on in the Middle East. So I don't
Yeah.
want to preempt our conversation.
Yes. Now we're gonna dive just right into it, and I'll begin with Saul. The current crisis in the Middle East is escalating with no clear end in sight. Walk us through the historical evolution of the Iran, Israel, and the U.S. relationship, from the Iranian Revolution to the Iran-Iraq War to JCPOA nuclear deal. Why were these moments so defining for all sides, and how do we shape the present confrontation? Obviously, this is a whole several years of discourse that we can sit and talk about, and I don't expect you to walk us through all of that, but really, what is your understanding of the importance of some of these defining moments in the history of this crisis that we're experiencing today?
Yeah, so no, definitely, because Iran has 2,500 years of existence, so we cannot go all the way back to that point. But at least we can start in the 50s with Mossadegh. So the Iranians decided that they were going to have kind of a constitutional republic, right?
Mhm.
So they had a politician named Mossadegh who was more nationalistic than the previous Qajar dynasty and the monarchies that came before, and with the help of the CIA and the British, he was taken out, basically, and thrown into jail. And I think he ended up dying there or whatever. He was executed. I don't know what what the story was behind it. But then, yeah, we changed their government, and then we instituted a puppet government. And when I say we, I'm talking about the United States, right? And instituted a puppet government under the Pahlavi dynasty. Well, the older Pahlavi, that's the fourth Shah, really wasn't a cool guy, so we didn't like him. We sent him to South Africa, and then we took the 20-something-year-old kid, which is Reza Shah, to lead that country. And he led that country. And he made a lot of changes in that country too. But what happened was he was a mouthpiece of the United States, and the oil that was there, because the British were heavily invested in the British Petroleum BP, heavily invested in Iran. And, of course, wherever there's oil, the United States is going to be part of it, right? So the younger generation, and we have to understand how the revolution itself happened. These were young kids who were down in the streets. University students are just normal people who are like, we are done with the king. We don't want the king. He needs to go. But you don't have a revolution without a leader. Well, one of the leaders because the Ayatollah Khamenei, the first Ayatollah, he really was not in Iran. He was not even part of it, right? He was in
Yeah,
France.
yeah.
He was in France.
It was in
The,
France.
revol- the revolution started on the ground by people who are like, we are done with this guy. He needs to go. But then you don't just have a revolutionary leader. He became the rallying cry because during that time he was sending cassettes, people were listening to his sermons, and he was the one who was against the state, against the Pahlavi dynasty. And then that's how they toppled the dynasty. And then he was flown Air France all the way back into Tehran, and with a massive fanfare. And that was the same time too when during the protests, the revolution, the American embassy was occupied by the students, and they held some people in custody, and then what they did, held them as hostages, right? They released all black people and women because they're like, black people, you all have suffered enough in America, so we're not going to keep any black people in the embassy. So that's people were sent back, and women, and I think except for only one black person that was held there or whatever. But long story short, that's how the revolution happened. And when the revolution happened, we can say whatever we want about Iran, but the system itself is not anti-democratic, because people assume that the Ayatollah is some like a king. No, it's not. The Ayatollah is actually, this is how it works. You have elections where the president is picked by the people. And then you have the councils who are also, for the most part, elected and whatnot. Those are the people who come together and pick who's going to be the Ayatollah. That's how it works. The Ayatollah that was executed was a former president. He was the former president of Iran. And when they give him the Ayatollahship, I'm adding the ship in there, the suffix here. He didn't want to take it for a year but then he ended up taking the job, right? The problem we have with Iran, the United States have had with Iran for the longest time, is strictly geopolitics, right? It's a power play, right? And Israel will always be at the center of that, right? Israel want to be the most powerful country in the Middle East, without a doubt, right? Is want to actually be the only hegemon in the Middle East. So if you look at the wars in the Middle East, for the most part, you look at from Iraq, Iran. And the funny thing is, when Saddam Hussein in the 1980s went to war against Iran, we supported Saddam. The United States government did. Provided him weapons, supported him against, and by the end of the 80s, early 90s, we went against Saddam. But this is just the historical context here, right? And the JCPOA in the mid 2000 and 2010s, the Europeans, the United States government under Barack Obama signed a joint peace agreement with Iran that they're going to enrich their nuclear capabilities, and then they're going to have inspectors on the ground to make sure that that doesn't happen. And that's literally what happened. But you have to understand, before that bill was even signed by Obama, Netanyahu came to the Congress and gave a speech because the Israeli government was totally against that, totally against that, right? And then when Trump came, he basically tore that stuff into pieces. Then what's going to happen next? Well, it was it is basically what Mr. Jeng was talking about, is on the unpredictability of things, right? You cannot really predict what's going to happen next. And I think one of Iran's biggest, the thing that hampered their, what really constrained them was the Ayatollah gave a fatwa that they could not develop nuclear weapons. He did that. If he hadn't, I would say Iran probably would at this point be a nuclear power. But this says a lot too about where we are going, and the power of the deterrence, right? For any country now, the reason why didn't we go after North Korea? Because they have a nuclear bomb. So now this is, we're gonna have an arms race, because I don't think countries like Saudi Arabia are just gonna sit idly by just to be a vassal of the United States for the United States to protect them. They're gonna develop their own nuclear weapons. Iran, after this, whatever is gonna be constituted, they have to do that too for their own survival. So we're gonna have a new arms race. Where that ends, I have no idea, because we have some countries that have nuclear weapons that are so reckless, like Pakistan. Really, every day you're scared that something is going to happen, right? So now we're going to have
Yeah.
an arms race, and that is my biggest worry after this war, because a ground invasion, you cannot really go and topple Iran. I mean, it's not realistic, right? Iran is the size of Western Europe. It has almost 92 million people, and we just don't have the capacity and the political will from the American people to send American boys and girls into Iran to fight a war. That era is over. Of course, the United States government and Israel can literally absolutely destroy that system. The problem is, Iran is not Venezuela. It's not a dictatorship of one person. It's a bureaucracy. It's a dictator. It's a bureaucratic dictatorship, right? So you can get rid of people, but the system is still there. So this is what we mean by strong institutions. Iran has strong institutions. Getting rid of the leaders doesn't end at those institutions.
Mhm.
Actually, they're basically just going to bring some more people to just run the system. But yeah, that's how we ended up where we are today.
Mr. Jeng, given your research background, how do you interpret the broader geopolitical stakes of this conflict? What does this crisis reveal about shifting alliances in the Middle East, the role of non state actors, the limits of US influence in the region? But also, if you may also talk a little bit about the idea of this class of civilizations, that it seems like it's also going on, that sort of underpins some of these conflicts that are happening.
Mhm. I mean, there are different aisle to the conversation. To pick up from where you landed from, in terms of like the class of civilization, a lot of people are concerned that what is happening, it's more of a Christian, I would say Christian Zionist, on the one hand, and then Islamo ideology on the other hand. But I think the problem is bigger than that. This is not only about civilizational
Mhm.
conflict, is geostrategic, as Dr. Njie has mentioned. It is important to see who is benefiting, who stands to benefit mostly from this. And I think the major beneficiary, which is not clearly known, is Saudi Arabia in many ways.
Mhm.
It is not in the interest of Saudi Arabia for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It is not in the interest of Israel. Of course, we all know, obviously, Israel is the biggest beneficiary here, but I'm talking about the hidden beneficiary who we basically don't talk about. But I think what is happening is a reflection of the geopolitical system collapsing in the Middle East. After the Iraq War, what we had was a system that is more or less managed by the United States, and that management is faltering in a sense that that system of management is losing its ground, and of course, Israel wants to be the hegemon, like Doctor has just mentioned. Israel wants to be the hegemon, the main influencer, the power broker of the Middle East. Of course, it is nuclear. And I don't think it was supposed to be in the first place. Neither Pakistan nor India, according to the agreement that came about after the Second World War. But um, Israel is, a lot of people say this, and I think I don't want to be quoted, but they say it's an American project. The country itself, from its existence to date, is an American project. And when I listen to Netanyahu speak, a lot of the times I listen to him on podcasts. I don't know his obsession with restoring relations with Saudi Arabia, because he feels like restoring relationship with Saudi Arabia will weaken many other countries in the Middle East, including Iran. So for me, my concern is not whether Iran will be replaced by a democratic system or not. What we have to understand is that there is something called the Persian pride. Iranian people are very proud of themselves. They are a people who have so much pride in their existence, in the Persian, what it means to be a person. This is why I feel like a ground boot on the ground is going to be disastrous. It's going to be more than Vietnam. The topography of Iran is different from other places that the United States is used to. So I find it very interesting to see where this thing is headed. But again, we have to understand. A lot of people, I say, yesterday I listened to the congressman who went to classified briefing. When they came out, they said, a few of the Democrats who went in, they said they were a little bit optimistic when they went in, but they came out, they were absolutely confused because they don't know the end goal of what is going on. And I think that is something interesting, because the briefings that we see in the media, it's far from the reality on the ground. So that is important to take into account, because no one thought Iran would last for more than 5 days when the conflict started. Given you have the two most important intelligence in the world, the Mossad and the CIA, you have one of the two of the most powerful states in the world, Israel and the United States, attacking you, and you are in your seventh day, and you are still able to sustain casualties in terms of how you attack these people. That is an interesting dynamic that a lot of people didn't see coming.
So I've always, I think, at this point of my life, believed that there has not been any worse time that we're faced with an existential question of nuclear weapons, or in fact, another world war than we are today. In terms of where international law is, in terms of how countries are so unrestrained, in terms of how powerful forces or powerful nations go after less powerful countries. And so I'm curious to ask you a situation where all these powerful countries have nuclear weapons, which often than not, you have it not to use it, you have it to serve as a deterrent. That's the whole, at least the most important purpose, as John Mearsheimer would famously say, is all of them, when they have it, now nobody is going to attack anybody, because then everybody would exercise restraint, because it would mark the end of all of us. What is the significance of countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, or Iran, um, Or even, say, for example, Africa, which is never brought up in conversations of security. How should we prioritize investment? Because you look at France recently with what they're doing, since they know, the power is shifting, and countries are not going to, United States is not going to continue to fund a large part of NATO security budget, right? What is the significance of nation states prioritizing their national security, prioritizing their military, upping up their budget for their defense systems, among other things?
No, I mean, I think it goes back to what Ahmad said about de Gaulle, right? So when the Europeans were going the way of America, France is like, no, we're gonna have our own nuclear energy, no nuclear weapons. So that's why right now in Europe, France is probably the only one who has that kind of capability, right? The other ones are like, well, we don't need it. We have all these American bases. America is gonna protect us, and instead of putting our money into military, we can just create like a social welfare state, right? Now they realize that that was a huge mistake. Right, you're gonna just rely on entities outside your country, and I think we're going the route of nationalism, right? And going back to what Ahmed said, the Persians are very proud people. Iran is not a made up country like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or Iraq or Syria. These are literally made up by Europeans. Iran is not. Right? Iran is not a made up, invented country by Europe. Iran was invented by the Iranians. And they have a long history of existing. So anything is to have some fracturing within Iran is hard, right? That doesn't mean they don't have minorities. They have the Azeris, they have the Balokis, and they have the Kurds, they have the Jews, they have all the smaller entities within Iran. So not everybody is Persian, but they're all part of the Persian culture and the Persian civilization. And there's a cohesion there that don't exist in the made up Arab countries, right? Even in the Arab Emirates. Going back to the idea of deterrence, this is where we are going to be going. I mean, I just don't see how we're going to stop this, right? Because the goal of every state is to protect that state. How do you protect that state? Nuclear. That's why North Korea still exists and Libya, Gaddafi is not around. That's why Saddam Hussein is not around. That's why the Ayatollah is not around, right? So this is where things are going. I just don't see a stop to this. I just don't. And I know the United States at the end of the Cold War, whatever, signed an agreement with Soviet Union or now Russia about nuclear proliferation or whatever. So we were supposed to sign another one or whatever. I don't think we have yet. So where that even gonna go with Russia or whatever, I don't know. But I think for any country now, the Europeans are definitely gonna go that route as well. Like they just have to. We're gonna see nuclear an arms race. There's just an arms race. So the Arab countries too in the Gulf now they know that they're like sitting ducks, right? So they're gonna invest more money into armaments and that kind of stuff. So it's an arms race, like John Mark Sharma said, right? This is the deterrence. Whether it's gonna be catastrophic at some point, probably, because it is humans build this thing, so mistakes can happen. We saw what happened in Fukushima and all that stuff. In Africa, I don't even think we are even there. We are reactionary. We are not proactive, right? We are at the mercy of what is out there. I mean, just taking it a notch down. All the serious countries in the world now are thinking about how to regulate AI, how to use AI to benefit them and whatnot. In places like Gambia, those conversations are not. We're just consuming stuff. We're not even thinking the ramifications of these things. So I think the problem for many African countries, we're still in survival mode. The other countries are way beyond survival mode. They have the luxury to think. Most of us don't have the luxury to think. We have the luxury to think. We don't, it's a luxury because we're thinking about the next meal. We're thinking about the next thing. So we are reactionaries. So that's why even our policies that we have, like we're going back to marijuana and all that stuff, they didn't come from us. Somebody put that stuff out there. We saw it. Like, this is great. Copy and paste. That's what we do. So we don't look at things specifically that benefit our interests. The only country that had nuclear weapons in Africa was South Africa. Well, what happened? Well, when fell, they realized, wait a minute, now we're going to give it to the blacks? No, they got rid of it, right? So because the blacks were going to take over, right? So South Africa would have been a whole different country as well, too, that if it had that. So nuclear weapons are deterrents. I don't think anybody can tell me otherwise unless I see an evidence that it's not. That's why Russia
Actually,
still exists. Go ahead. Yeah. And they, some countries are probably going to use it if it comes to that. I can see Russia using that at some point if literally push come to shove. And I can definitely see Israel using it is push come to shove. So the fact that countries are not going to use it, I think is foolhardy because countries have to exist. And if they think another country poses a threat to their existence, they will have to use it and then they will explain later.
I
Amat.
definitely agree. We're
Mhm.
moving towards. I definitely agree. We're moving towards that. Of course, this is built on the theory of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction, which basically means I have nuclear, you have nuclear, you attack me, I attack you, then we mutually destroy each other. So I think that is an important thing. And another thing which has been the norms, of course, since in the 90s, especially in Scandinavia, is the democratic thesis, which basically means democratic countries do not fight one another. We have that in the case of Denmark and Sweden. They're so peaceful to the extent that even if Denmark would threaten Sweden, Sweden would just laugh it off. If India would threaten Pakistan, Pakistan will go all arm and get ready to fight. So the democratic idea, because I think in the 90s there was a nuclear leakage in one of Sweden's nuclear powers in Sweden. That is very close to Denmark, and the Danish foreign minister was saying if Sweden doesn't fix the problem, they're gonna invade Sweden. So the Swedish minister responded, I said, if you invade us, we are going to release barrel of our fish. They have a smelly fish, they call it herrings. We're going to release barrels of fish in the street of Copenhagen. So you can see that joviality is something that is missing in many neighboring countries. Because if Pakistan would say that to India, India would be all ready to go to war. So the democratic thesis is something also probably we would have where states feel like we don't have the capabilities to develop nuclear weapons, but we have the capability to think outside the box and build norms and structures that would ensure that our people would love one another to the extent that there would be no fighting. I think that is important. That is like thinking of Canada and the US. I don't
Mhm.
foresee the United States attacking Canada or Canada attacking the United States. So that kind of norm is something probably that will be built. But in majority of countries, like Dr. just mentioned, I believe they will go nuclear because they see that that is the only way they can protect themselves.
Well, I like to wrap things up on a very optimistic note because I am an optimist. I'm mostly, I consider myself a victim of hope, and so I think optimism is mostly um, a little more settling. Excuse me, I have a little cold. It's a little more settling for me. So today, I would like us to wrap up on an optimistic note on peace, bearing in mind or given all that is happening around the world. In fact, I know Ahmad for one, tons of his some of his social media accounts because of the gravity and how incensed he becomes with seeing just how we watch the broadcast of the carnage that we see human beings go through. Also, this is in line with what one of I think the historians would say that history is a slaughterhouse. We've seen this happen before. That human beings have always wrestled with death. Human beings are capable of, very committing things that otherwise that ordinarily we think we're not possible of. But if you read history, you know that there's a lot of this happening. So what is happening today in many ways is not unique. It has happened in the past. A lot of people have lost their lives to wars and conflicts around the world. But we are people of hope. We're people of optimism, and we believe human beings are also capable of coming together and having a dialogue and solving the various problems that we have. And I would like to ask each of you, what is your call for hope and what is your call for peace in these very trying times for us as people?
For me, I think hope is necessary because it's a form of resilience, right? It helps. It helps. It's a kind of a buffer. But I'm a theorist, so I see the wall. I see chaos out there. I don't. Sometimes I don't buy into the hope that people do because it's always been chaotic out there. But one line here that we need to keep in mind is we're probably perhaps also living in one of the most peaceful times in the last few hundred
I
years.
wanted
And
to
I
say
think
that.
sometimes, yeah, and I think sometimes we
Mhm.
forget that. Sometimes we forget that, right? Because
Yeah.
of social media, we have access to these things, right? But we're probably living in one of the most peaceful times in not only living memory, but at least in the last 200 years. Because look at it this way: between 1848, in Europe, the massacres of just cousins killing each other, up until 1945, up until 1945, we're talking about hundreds of millions of humans just destroying each other for no reason that actually makes sense to us today. And that's what brought us to these institutions that we built, like the United Nations. If there is any hope, it will be at the United Nations level to allow and give us that platform to have conversations, because diplomacy it works. But we cannot also be despair and be pessimistic that things are falling apart, because they're actually not. They're falling apart in some places, but globally, we are living in one of the most peaceful times in the history of, at least in recent memory. So conversations, diplomacy, let's give it a chance, right? It's a call. It's a call for peace, and that if we can have conversations, because what do all these states want? They want their kids to thrive. They want better schools. They want to prosper. Why are they attacking each other? Survival and fear. If we can take that out, the moment we take that off and start talking and having conversations, we can fix a great many of our problems in the world. But again, people are irrational and the states act based on their own interests. So that means we're always going to have macabre. We're always going to have violence. Always going to have an unequal justice system and international order. That's just here to stay. It's not going anywhere. But if anything, if our countries, specifically in Africa, can develop systems like you have in China, in Singapore, will at least be respected. And my hope is we can learn and respect ourselves rather than being appendages of systems that are outside our societies. So the hope is self respect.
Ahmad.
Yes, I think Doctor has said it all. I think we live in a world today which is more peaceful compared to how the world was 200, 300 years ago. But today we are caught between two things. One is the global south that is actually more interested in justice, and the richer countries that are interested in peace. And this is where the conflict is going on right now. The United States is interested in peace here and there, maybe not, but the global South is more like we want justice. There is no justice without peace. But the optimistic note to end this conversation is to say that what we are witnessing right now, it's just an episode of our current contemporary world. It is gonna, we're gonna get through this, and we're gonna pass this and move on to other levels. But I think a lot of countries are learning also from what is going on, and that would serve as deterrence for future conflicts in the long run. And going back home to the Gambia and of course Africa, I think the optimistic part is that we are trying to decolonize the narrative of the global order, and that is to say, oh, when Europeans are talking about world war, no, it's not world war, it's your war, we're not involved. It's a tribal European war, you can fight among yourself. It's not a world war. We are here drinking our attire and what have we. Of course we will feel the effects and all of that, but we are refusing a lot of African countries, and I think African Union is heading to that. Probably is going to be in the long run man with smart intellectual people who are aware of the global dynamics, who refuse to be dragged into European tribal wars, and I think that is really important. And yeah, I'm optimistic, very optimistic when it comes to Africa, very optimistic when it comes to the Gambia. About the world, I am a realist, I would say.
Well, gentlemen, it's been absolutely brilliant chatting with both of you. Dr. Sulayman Njie, political scientist, policy analyst, Gambian based in Texas, and Amat Jeng, scholar at Howard University, and also Gambian and an author. By the way, Saul, I have his book over here. Ahmad, you need to send a copy to Suleiman too.
I
I'm
need a
sure.
copy so that I can
Yes,
Yes,
review
yes,
it.
definitely,
it's on
definitely,
Amazon
definitely.
actually. So I think
I'm
I'm sure
very
you
Okay,
can.
guys, send me
yes.
the link somewhere. Send me the link and I'll get it off Amazon.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you both so much. Thank you for
All
being
right.
here. We're going to have more of these as time goes on, depending on what's going on. I really appreciate both of your time, and to our audience as well who are here, especially those of you on YouTube. Thank you all so very much for being here and for engaging with us as well. You all have a really wonderful Saturday and the rest of your